Welcome to Behind the Tools. Here's Tradify CEO and your host, Michael Steckler.
Hi everyone, welcome to the Behind the Tools podcast with me, Michael from Tradify, and I'm delighted this week. Every week we've actually spoken predominantly to people who are on the tools, working in the trades, in the home services business, in the UK, Australia, New Zealand. I'm delighted we've got Ryan Englin here joining us from Phoenix in Arizona. Ryan is with a company called Core Matters, and Ryan is the host of another podcast called the Blue Collar Culture Podcast. He's also the author of a book, I'm going to make sure I get the name right, Unmasked, How to Hire the Ones You Want to Fire. And so Ryan's business, and I'll let him talk to it, but it's really about how to help home services and trades companies hire the right employees and keep them motivated, which is obviously a really, really big challenge. And so with this podcast, although I'm predominantly talking to people on the tools, we also wanted to speak to people that influence those people and help those people do a better job and grow their business. And Ryan is one of those. So for those that don't know, we have lots of people all over the world. Phoenix is a very warm, lovely state, bordering very close to California, borders Mexico, on the sort of west coast of America. So Ryan, really glad you could join and welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Cool. And Ryan, do you want to say a little bit about Core Matters and your business and what you do, just as an introduction?
Sure. Yeah, I started my marketing company just over 10 years ago. And our primary focus was lead gen for home service companies. So we were doing the very traditional advertising, websites, email marketing, those kinds of things for your HVAC contractors, your plumbers. And it was about 6 years ago now that they were just really struggling to get to the leads. So they would always call me like, hey, pause the leads this month. I can't get to them. I'm too far behind. I'm booked out too far.
Right.
And when I started really looking at the root cause, it was, we don't have enough guys. We got trucks sitting empty in the lot. Like we're booking 3 weeks out. For those of you who don't know, 110, 120 degree summers are pretty common here in Phoenix. And it was an HVAC company. They were booking 3 weeks out in July. So people weren't sticking around. So I was like, hey, let's solve that problem. That sounds like a lot of fun. So 6 years ago, I pivoted my business and I started working directly with these home service contractors to just help them hire better people faster, with a focus on the technician, a focus on the customer service rep, because there was really no one serving that market. And for a lot of these guys, they didn't know how to hire. They didn't have a process. They just weren't clear on how to do it. And so
right.
Thus was born Core Matters and the Core Fit hiring system. And here we are today.
Fantastic. Yeah. And it's this is a sort of root cause problem that we hear from pretty much all of our customers. They either don't want to hire more people because they see it as a painful thing to have to go through. There's an element of risk in terms of bringing new employees on, and do you trust them? They can do the same level of work. And then I think there's one of the limiting factors you refer to growth is that most of the people we talk to have more work than they can cope with. And the main limiting factor is really finding good people to help support that work when they're not just potentially subcontracting. And then, you're in the US, things seem to be improving with sort of vaccine rollout, which has been really, really positive to see. How have things changed? Where are you at right now with sort of the home service, plumbers, electricians, HVAC companies that you work with? Where are they right now in terms of hiring? What does the employment market look like in the US today?
So 2020 was a banner year. If you were a home service contractor, like you blew every revenue goal out of the water because everybody went home to work. And so they're sitting here at home and that toilet's getting a lot more use than it normally does. Like, hey, maybe we should have somebody out to figure out why it's not working. And so for a lot of them, it got to the point where the market had so much demand for home service contractors. I think they almost got used to waiting.
Right.
So it just became this thing. Well, everybody I call is 6 weeks out. So I guess I'll go with you. And it's been a real challenge to find people because during COVID, there was a lot of uncertainty. There still is some uncertainty, but there was a lot of uncertainty and people didn't want to make a change. So even though they might not have really enjoyed the place they were working, or they could have got more pay, it was just almost safer to sit tight. And so what we've seen is we have more jobs open in the United States now than we did prior to COVID. So like, it's just insane how many employers are hiring right now. It's crazy.
Yeah, that's great. That is crazy. And it's sort of, that seemed to be a worldwide thing. To your point, I think a couple of things happened. People that had disposable income were lucky enough to have disposable income. weren't going on, vacation or holiday. So they were then sort of investing that money into home improvement. And then, like you said, people were just home more, so they were breaking stuff. I spoke to a plumber and a HVAC engineer recently. He just said, yeah, I was called out because people were, trying to fix things and doing it themselves and blowing it up. And so then they'd call us to come out and fix it. So there was a lot more of that type of stuff happening as well, which was great. So yeah, the market's bounced back. So does that mean that it's still really difficult to hire people if you're a home service contractor in the US?
It is very difficult. And I think the big thing that's happening is there are people out there looking for jobs. There are people that want these jobs. But for most of the people we talk to, the challenge is finding the good people or the right people, as a lot of people say. Like, I just want the person that cares. And that's been the biggest challenge, is finding the people that really align with what you want out of an employee. Yeah.
And so one of the sort of bigger hurdles I see, and I sort of refer to this, some of our customers, they're growing really quickly. They've got more work than they can cope with. They really see hiring and getting that first employee as a big hurdle. What have you seen that's really been the biggest thing that's helped, contractors or people, who are essentially on their own at some point in time, get past that and hire their first employee? What's usually been the trigger point, and what's helped them make that decision?
Yeah, I think they first have to decide that they want to hire somebody, because as you and I both know, like, there are headaches that come along with building a team, may outweigh the fact that you can't get to all your business. Who knows? But once they've made that decision, hey, I want to build a team, the easiest thing we've seen people do is just start asking their friends, their family, their network. Somebody knows somebody looking. And here's the thing about asking your network is, hopefully they like you and you like them. And if so, that means anybody they refer, it'll probably be a good fit. So our focus is entirely on fit. I could care less if someone can turn a wrench. What I care about more is, do they want to get out of bed on time, get to the job site on time, take care of the customer, those kinds of things. And through referrals is where you're going to find that first person. So really put your effort there.
Oh, that's really interesting. So you talking really about cultural fit, which is something I hadn't necessarily thought about in terms of trades businesses, but it does come up a lot, and I think is important. So has your recommendation with companies you work with been to find those people that have the energy, enthusiasm, customer focused first, and then train them on the job?
If that's what's needed, yeah. I always tell people, hire for the things you can't or won't train, and then train for the rest. But I think the thing to remember is that if you're out in a truck all day, because I imagine if you're hiring your first person, you're not going to be sitting behind an office or riding along with them. Like, you're in a truck and the other guy's in a truck, right?
Yeah.
So if they're in a truck, they're working remote. You don't get to manage them. You don't get to watch over them. You don't get to do any of that. Like, maybe you get together once a week just to talk about what the route's going to look like. But other than that, you're really not seeing a lot of this person. So if there's not a cultural fit, you could turn somebody loose to go deal with your customers that you've spent a lot of time, energy, and money gathering and generating this great business. You turn someone loose who's not a cultural fit, and they can really destroy it quickly.
Yeah. Because reputation, you touched on how your business started. And I think one of the things that I found interesting is how much of, the work is generated word of mouth. And it's sort of interesting. You talked about, networks in terms of finding employees is another really good path for doing that. But actually, most of their work is word of mouth. So I think if you damage that word of mouth reputation, that's probably about the worst thing you could do to a small business trades company. I mean, that's ultimately could be the death of that reputation. So Absolutely. what are the most common mistakes you tend to see when you see home services companies out there hiring in the US?
So I think the biggest thing I see is they haven't really figured out who they want to hire. Like, it sounds silly, but it's like, oh, I want to hire a guy that can work on these air conditioning units, or that, can crawl under crawl spaces or whatever. And it's like, well, is that really what you want? Do you want someone that could just do the work, or someone that really is going to take care of your customer like you would? And so I think getting really clear on who it is that you want to hire, what behaviors, what traits, what hobbies, like, really think through what's the kind of person you want to hire. We had a client as an electrical contractor, and they had no idea they were doing this until we called it out. They would only hire people that had tattoos, visible tattoos. It was the weirdest thing. And once they saw it, they're like,
they specifically had that on the almost, I guess, was that an informal job spec thing that it's like, you have to have a tattoo to work for this company? Yeah.
It was, and I asked them, I said, tell me about the last person that didn't have a tattoo. Oh, they didn't make it. So clearly that's part of being there. And there's nothing that says you have to have a tattoo to be a good electrician. But for them, if you didn't have a tattoo, you weren't going to be on the team very long. And so they just got really clear and they accepted that. And said, you know what, that's right. So they started putting out there, what are the kind of behaviors and traits and hobbies that people with tattoos have? Like they have similar interests and similar tastes. And they all of a sudden they started attracting a better group of people that more aligned to their culture.
Oh, wow. So that's not where I was expecting you to go. So they actually doubled down on the tattoo thing because they figured out that the people that joined that didn't, it wasn't necessarily they didn't have tattoos. It was they just weren't they weren't aligned with the rest of the team. Yeah. Is that, yeah.
Yeah, wow. And I think that's one of the biggest things that holds a lot of people back, especially when you're by yourself. That first hire is such a high risk. And we all have heard a story of someone who made a mistake hiring the wrong person. And I think once they got really clear on, you know what, it's not about someone that can do the skills. It's about someone we can trust, someone we can relate to, someone that can feel like they belong on our team. And once they opened that up, all of a sudden, it was really easy to figure out how to teach them what they needed to do. So I think that getting really clear on what you want in a person, not in a tech, is what's really important. I think that's one of the first things I miss. And the second mistake I think they all make is they don't spend enough time getting to know the person. Right? If you're going to spend an hour interviewing somebody, that's a job you just lost. Right? That's a job you could have gone on and build an hour, but you've lost it interviewing somebody. But you need to have that mindset of the more time I spend with them, the easier it's going to be for me to turn them loose in their own truck and take care of my clients. I think that's the other mistake they make. We had a client a while back that they said they had a 100-point system for how they were going to hire, how they interviewed guys. And I said, great, that's awesome. You're objective about it. You're measuring it. What are you doing? They said, well, they get 90 points if they show up for the interview.
90.
I go, 90 points for showing up. I'm like, well, that's a low bar. I go, how do they get the other 10? They go, they can catch the keys to the truck. Just like, that was it.
Just they can catch.
They could catch the keys to the truck. Like that's how they got the other 10. And I think they were being a little cheeky with it, but it was almost true. Like they show up and they can grab the keys. If they can do those two things, they're hired. And I think that's the second place that they miss, is that they don't spend enough time interviewing somebody to really get to know who they are.
And is that because they're not comfortable with the sort of techniques or questions they might need to ask to really understand what someone's about? Is that driving some of that behavior, or they're just trying to make a quick decision because it's on a long list of things they'd rather not be doing?
Yeah, I think that one is more important. It's a long list of things they'd rather not be doing, because every job they don't get to go out and because they're interviewing is lost revenue.
Yeah.
But I think deep down, one of the root causes is they were never taught how to do this. They don't have the skills. They don't know what questions to ask. And that's why we wrote the book, Unmasked. It's so that it's a whole how-to guide. Here are some ways to ask some questions to really get to the authenticity behind the person. Like, who is this person really? That's why we wrote that book.
And what do you see in terms of the people that do apply your model, but similar models around good interviewing techniques, figuring out who the right person is that's going to fit with the team? Do you track kind of retention, like longevity of those employees within those companies over time? Has there been a correlation if you get it right the first time?
Yeah, so we still have people that struggle with turnover, especially if you do a lot of bid work, job start. But for the technicians that are coming in through our system, when the system is followed, we see turnover drop by 60% almost immediately. So half the guys that you're losing, you're not going to lose anymore.
Yeah,
almost immediately. And then long term, 2, 3, 4 years down the road, a lot of those guys are still there, or they've moved on to do other things. So a lot of times we find technicians that do really good at commercial work or just really good service work, and then they'll move into a sales role in the organization.
Yeah.
And so we start creating these career paths inside the company, and before you know it, you have a leadership team and you've got new techs, and it's really nice to see the business snowball and grow like that.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's a good testament to that model. And how easy is it to get people to stick to the model? I mean, you just made a sort of comment there. I guess one of the challenges is like, do they do this for every hire, or do they just go back to you turned up,
some
you
of them
caught
pull
the
back,
keys?
and that's part of the system is we put these processes in place so that they have that to fall into, so that when they do start going off of the system or going off script, they can pull back to it pretty easy. But if you think about most business owners or most guys that say, hey, I'm going to go do this on my own, they're type A personalities. They want to do it their way. And so it's always a challenge, but we make it really simple for them. We make it so that it's almost a step-by-step or paint by numbers. Like that's the whole process, so that they don't have to overthink it and they can just rely on the system to work. Yeah,
it makes total sense. I was chatting to an electrician the other day, and he sort of was very clear on the red flags for not picking customers, those customers that want to pay the cheapest price and aren't going to necessarily pay you on time. Are there red flags when hiring? Do you see any common red flags when people are looking to hire an employee into a home services business?
Absolutely. The first red flag is someone that is really interested in what the pay is. It's a huge red flag, because if they're leaving somebody else for money, they're going to leave you for money.
Yeah.
So one of the things we coach is never pay at the top of the market, because anybody that's drawn to that is easily going to be drawn away, because there's always somebody more desperate or
pay more.
willing to go bankrupt faster than you, right? So that's the first red flag, is somebody that's really obsessed with what the pay is. I think the other red flag that we see too is people that just really don't seem interested in being a part of the team. They want to do it their way. They just want to route. They just want to truck. We had one client, the tech was so obsessed with when his new truck was going to be there. And he's like, no, you're not getting a new truck. Like, we've got an empty one in the shop. He's like, if I'm not driving around in a new truck, I'm out. And it seems silly, but I know a lot of contractors that have actually given into that. They're so desperate. They're like, I'll just go get the guy a new truck.
It's really interesting. There's massive parallels to most. I mean, it's not that dissimilar to most businesses, right? If someone, their main first question is, how much are you going to pay me? And do I get a brand new laptop? Those sort of questions are, to me, always red flags around, you're looking for the right things in terms of the work that you're going to do. That's interesting. And are there any other big ones apart from obviously pay? And
I think the biggest challenge we have with finding good quality techs is they just don't invest in the process. So anybody that's not willing to invest in your process to get hired is not going to invest in your process when taking care of your customer. It's that simple.
Right. Yeah.
And so if they're not willing to show up on time, if they're not willing to go through 1 or 2 interviews, or, we have one client that does ride-alongs. He's like, hey, this Saturday for a couple hours, you're going to come ride along with me. We're going to go on some calls together. And anybody that barks at that is like, I'm not going to do that. Well, guess what? If you hire them, they're going to say the same thing about doing it your way. And so that's probably another big red flag, is anybody that doesn't want to go through the interview process, they're not going to be able to follow your processes either.
I was going to ask you about that. We've done some ride-alongs as a business, just to really, for us to understand more about what our customers need. That seems like a really smart thing to do as part of the hiring process. Is that something you recommend for most people to do as part of the hiring process? Is to get, because I mean, you talked a lot about cultural fit. It feels like if you want to get to know someone, and also for them to understand you and see the work that you do and the type of work, that seems like a really smart thing to do.
Yeah, I think it's a great thing to do if you can. 2 things. Number one, if you can do it in a way that's very structured, which means it's the same for everybody. Yes. One of the dangers that happens is you find out you both like the same sports team and you end up talking sports for 2 hours and you don't really get to know the person. So you got to make sure that you're willing to follow a process if you're going to do it. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you are going to do a ride along like that, you've got to be really flexible for when you can do it. If someone's got a 9 to 5 because they're already working for someone else, be willing to do a weekend ride along with them. Because for some people, to take a day off of work to go do a 2-hour ride along for a job they might not get, it's a high risk proposition.
Yeah, for sure. I completely agree. And where do you sit on sort of apprentices? That's a big discussion in the UK and Australia. There's been governmental kind of injection into attracting, young people into the home services trades business as a sort of first job start. How do you help companies with those sort of, fresh out of school people that, maybe it's their first job altogether, never had another job before? How do you approach that?
So in the US, we have registered apprenticeship programs that are registered at the state or the federal level. And there's a lot of different ways that you can get further funding to support that. But I think the bigger challenge is, it's great that you have the apprenticeship program. It's great that you've got the support of the government doing it. But if you can't create a marketing campaign around promoting the opportunity, it's all going to be for nothing.
Right.
See, there's a belief out there. We could have a whole episode on this, so I'll do my best to be brief. There's a belief out there that people don't, the kids, the high school kids, they don't know these jobs exist.
Right.
And if only they knew these jobs exist and they knew they could get into these apprenticeship programs, they'd be lining up to do it. And I think that the research and what I see firsthand, that's not true. The problem is that the industry as a whole has not done a very good job of creating a positive reputation for the modern workforce. And so I think people know the jobs exist. They don't want them. It's not cool to Instagram that you're a plumber, right? It's not cool to post on whatever social media platform you're using that you're crawling around on a hot roof because you're tearing off roofs and putting new roofs on. Like, it's not cool. It's way cooler to say, hey, look at my new job. I'm sitting at home in front of my computer answering calls for Amazon or someone like that, right? And so I think that there's this reputation piece that's missing from the apprenticeship programs. The trades are amazing career path. You can have an amazing living with no college debt because someone's willing to teach you how to do it. You just got to be willing to put in the time. And so I think if they could change that narrative from, hey, we have a program we're going to teach you, to this is why you should be a part of the program, I think they'd work really well. But we do encourage that. That's part of our process.
Yeah. I had a conversation with someone in the UK about this. And do you think that's changing? Because I think, to your point there, one thing I've seen over the years is that in my mind, it's always been obvious that if you did create your own plumbing, electric, whatever that business is, there is a really decent living to be had out of that, and the freedom that affords. I mean, it's not saying that it's not hard work, but it just allows people to operate when they want to operate, work with the customers they want to work with once they've built that reputation. So you can be very, very successful, as you rightly point out. And that's still, you think that's still a big barrier? You sort of refer to, I'm guessing in the US, that still seems to be an issue in terms of attracting people out of school into that profession.
Yeah, for the younger generation, absolutely. It's a real challenge for us. What we see is a lot of the guys that go start their own company, they were into the trades because they went into the family business or because a buddy told them about it. And so that's how they got acclimated to it. It wasn't they got up and said, I don't want to go to college, I want to go be an apprentice. I think it was more of they were pulled in there by a family or a friend.
And you think if the, really it's a marketing campaign, right? To sort of tell more about the things that it gives you, whether it's the, work for yourself, the sort of money I think those businesses can make over time, the level of demand, and also the longevity of that career, by the way. I mean, you always need, as COVID's shown anything, it's, there were certain businesses that people were in where you're like, actually, they're sort of more insulated from those types of things. Let's hope there's not another COVID anytime soon, but nevertheless that they feel pretty insulated. So it just feels like there needs to be more of a push from an industry level to address that, I guess, at school level, away from the more obvious, as you've rightly pointed out, those big kind of internet company type jobs that seem more obvious maybe, and they're sort of living, like you say, when they're living on Instagram and TikTok and everything else, that probably reinforces that narrative.
And since it's unlikely that the industry is really going to lock arms and solve this problem as a whole, especially for the guys that are smaller, remember this: if people can't find you, they can't learn about your jobs.
Yeah.
So it's really important that you put as much effort into marketing for your open positions as you put into advertising for leads, and maybe even more effort, because it almost seems like it's easy to find leads today. It's a lot harder.
That's not the issue.
No, the issue is not that.
The marketing, the advertising thing is really interesting to me. Actually, it's virtually everyone I speak to doesn't want to advertise or does very little because they don't need to. They've got more business than they can cope with, and B, it doesn't necessarily generate the right customer base in terms of the people that do search for a plumber. They often want the cheapest price, and you'd come out yesterday, and all those things which aren't always the best fit. I am quite fascinated by the growth in what I think of as trades, home services, influencers that we're really seeing across the world on YouTube and Instagram. And I do wonder whether some of those types of people that are really doing a great job of, showing the work they do and the benefits of being in the trades will help change that narrative somewhat for some of those school leavers that maybe haven't decided what career path they want to take. So do you see that in the US much? Is that
the influencers?
Yeah.
Not a whole lot. I would say that most of the influencers here are more in the coaching space. They're more working with the guys that have already decided they're going to do it, already have their license. I don't see a lot happening in the schools, although we do have an organization out here called Build Your Future. And they put a lot of marketing efforts, boots on the ground in the local communities to put up billboard ads and social media posts and really attract the younger generation into the trades.
Right.
But it's only one part of it. So they're making awareness that these jobs exist. But if you still have a bunch of contractors that are like, well, I'm going to stick with my old ways and I'm not going to train these guys. The number one complaint I hear from people when I say, hey, what happens when you go to the trade schools? Oh, trade schools don't know how to train people. Well, let's solve that problem. Like, let's sit down with the trade schools and say, hey, we can't take your students because you're not doing X, Y, and Z.
Yeah.
And so we really need to take more of a grassroots effort and just say, hey, we've all got to work together to fix this.
Yeah, definitely seems to be the case. And you talked about advertising. What's the best way to get jobs out there? I'm presuming it's clearly a very local thing, generally speaking, for most home services companies. But when you talked about make sure you focus on advertising job roles, what's the best way to do that? What advice would you give trades companies to advertise new roles?
I think a lot of it depends on what your budget is for something like that. There's a local HVAC contractor out here in Phoenix, Arizona. He runs radio ads that are all about the quality of technician that is going to come visit your home.
Yeah.
And it's like, our guys are clean, they're well shaven, they're groomed, they treat you right because we send them to training, because we invest in their families, because we give them great pay and benefits. It's a recruiting ad disguised as a call us when you need your unit fixed ad. And so like, that's one angle. The job boards, they're such a challenge because the job boards made it easy for job seekers to find a job with zero consideration for the employer. So they made it so a job seeker can check 10 jobs and say, apply for all of them. And you're left sorting through all that. So we find that if you're going to invest anything in advertising, I would spend the time promoting your culture and spend the time promoting any type of referral program you have. One of the things we're starting to see in the referral programs is not just paying a bounty or a reward to your employee, but also doing third party. So if one of your suppliers provides you with a referral, you give them a bonus. And so just putting that money and that effort towards that, it's probably one of the first steps you should take.
Yeah, great. Brilliant. Ryan, this is really, really insightful. One last question. If there's one thing, so there's a lot of small business company owners listening to this, lots of stuff, lots of great stuff they can think through, but there's just one thing they should do tomorrow that, helps them on this journey of hiring maybe it's their first employee, actually, maybe they're a one-person company and they're about to make that first hire. What would you tell them is the number one thing they should do first?
So I would get really clear on what it is that you value in your organization and start interviewing for that.
Yeah.
A lot of times we talk about it as core values, but what are the things that you value that are important to you as the owner, and focus your interviews on those things.
Fantastic. Great. Now I have a series of rapid fire questions, which I think hopefully you've seen in advance. I'm going to quickly ask you. I ask every single person who have predominantly been on the tools. So your answers might be somewhat different, but the first one is, if you weren't doing what you're doing, and I know you love what you're doing, but if you weren't doing what you're doing, what would you do instead?
Yeah, I love building with my hands. I'd be in woodworking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
I'd be doing something with wood. That's all I know.
So down here, they'd call you a chippy, I think is the phrase.
Chippy? Okay. Yeah.
You were doing great. Okay, cool. Second question is favorite on site. So when you're working, what's your favorite lunch? You go to lunch.
My favorite lunch. I've been on this salad kick lately. So salad with just a bunch of meat, steak on it, chicken on it, whatever. Like, gotta have that.
A good protein heavy salad. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Fantastic. All right, and then this is a tricky one. We're sort of asking them what would be your go-to tool that you would use, but I'm presuming I'll ask you the question differently, which is, you're at home, you're breaking stuff. What's your favorite tool that you use that you'd be lost without?
My favorite, it's the Dremel. So I could do almost anything with a Dremel.
And the next question is what? Well, this question probably isn't as appropriate. So I'll go back to the next one, which is, things are opening up in the US, which is great to see. What would be the first sporting or music event you would go to?
That's a tough one. You know what, though? I haven't been to a hockey game in a long time. So the hockey games, they shut down because they were all indoors. But
yeah.
Enjoy going to a hockey game.
Are they opening up again soon? I'm not sure what the status is.
I think it's so hit or miss. I haven't paid attention much. I think I'm in the habit of not. So
yeah, see how it plays out. And the last question is, we're talking to lots of people like you, and this was a great conversation. Are there other people you think we should speak to who would have an interesting point of view on helping or have insight on home services companies and the trades in general?
I would say that I think the biggest thing I see is a lack of process in the trades, of systems that employees can follow. As the owner, it's really easy to say, well, we're doing it my way. But if you can't communicate what my way means, it's a real problem. So I'm a huge fan of the entrepreneurial operating system, EOS, the book Traction. So anybody that is helping business owners with that would be a great guest. Yeah,
fantastic. Great. Well, Ryan, appreciate you joining us. This was really, really helpful. And I'm sure given lots of people who are in this process of hiring their first person some food for thought. So thanks again for joining the show. It's been a pleasure. And you're welcome. And then those listening, as always, if you could give us the 5-star review on Spotify, Apple, or your chosen podcast player, that would be appreciated. And we will speak soon. Cheers.
And that brings us to the end of this episode. Behind the Tools is brought to you by Tradify, job management software for your trade business. If you enjoyed the podcast, let us know by leaving a review, and be sure to tell your mates about it. Email behindthetools@tradifyhq.com if you or someone you know would be keen to join the show as a guest.